I'm Piper, 28, and 3 days ago, I attended my own funeral. My sister Victoria gave a beautiful eulogy about how much she'd miss me, while my brother-in-law Logan wiped away what looked like genuine tears. The whole thing was quite touching, really. Too bad I was watching from the back of the church with two police officers. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt betrayed by family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. You're probably wondering how someone ends up at their own funeral very much alive. Well, let me take you back to where this nightmare began. It started with what should have been the best news of my life becoming the worst thing that ever happened to me. 6 months ago, my father passed away after a long battle with cancer. Victoria and I had spent countless nights at his bedside, taking turns reading to him, making sure he wasn't alone. Through all those difficult months, we supported each other like we always had. We were more than sisters, we were best friends. Or so I thought. Growing up, Victoria and I were inseparable despite our 3-year age difference. We worked together at Dad's construction company every summer, learning the business from the ground up. While Victoria was brilliant with numbers and logistics, I had a natural talent for connecting with clients and managing teams. Dad used to joke that together, we made the perfect business partner. But there was always something different about how people responded to us. Employees would light up when I walked onto job sites, sharing their concerns and ideas freely. With Victoria, conversations felt more formal, calculated. She commanded respect through authority while I earned it through empathy. I never thought much about it until after Dad died. The day of the will reading, Victoria seemed unusually tense. We sat in the lawyer's office, holding hands like we had as children during thunderstorms. When Mr. Henderson began reading Dad's wishes, I expected everything to be split evenly between us. After all, we'd both dedicated our lives to the family business. Victoria inherited the beach house in Maine, Dad's vintage car collection, and a substantial cash inheritance. Generous gifts that reflected his love for his eldest daughter. Then came the surprise that changed everything between us forever. To my daughter Piper, I leave Harrison Construction Company in its entirety, including all assets, contracts, and future opportunities. She has shown the heart and integrity necessary to carry on our family legacy. The silence in that room was deafening. Victoria's hand went rigid in mine before she slowly pulled away. Her face cycled through shock, confusion, and something darker that I'd never seen before. Logan, who'd always assumed he'd eventually run the company alongside Victoria, looked like he'd been physically slapped. "I don't understand," Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible. "We both worked there. We both sacrificed for that company." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Your father was very specific about his decision. He believed Piper possessed the leadership qualities necessary for the company's future." I watched my sister's world crumble in real time. Everything she'd planned, everything she'd expected, everything she'd felt entitled to had just been handed to someone else. To me. The look she gave me in that moment should have been my first warning. Looking back, I should have seen the signs earlier. The way Logan's smile became forced when employees would seek me out for advice instead of going to Victoria. How Victoria's compliments about my work started carrying subtle barbs about luck versus skill. The increasing frequency of their private conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. But grief has a way of blinding you to everything except your own pain. After Dad's funeral, I threw myself into learning every aspect of the business I'd just inherited. There were contracts to review, relationships to maintain, and a company culture to preserve. Dad had built something special, and I was terrified of failing his memory. Harrison Construction wasn't just a business. It was Dad's legacy. He'd started it 30 years ago with nothing but determination and a used pickup truck. Through economic downturns, family struggles, and health scares, he'd never laid off a single employee. "We're not just building structures," he used to say. "We're building lives and communities." Victoria had always been more focused on profit margins and expansion opportunities. She had brilliant ideas about streamlining operations and increasing revenue. But she sometimes forgot that behind every payroll number was a family depending on their job. I understood both sides, which Dad said made me uniquely suited to lead. The weeks following the will reading were awkward but manageable. Victoria continued working in her role as Chief Financial Officer, though our easy banter had been replaced by polite professionalism. Logan remained as our head of operations, but I noticed him questioning my decisions more frequently than before. During team meetings, they would exchange glances when I spoke about maintaining Dad's values while exploring new opportunities. Small moments that individually meant nothing but collectively painted a picture of growing resentment. I told myself it was natural adjustment period stress, that eventually we'd find our new normal. One particularly difficult afternoon, I was reviewing Dad's personal notes about long-term company goals when Victoria knocked on my office door. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. For a moment, she looked exactly like the sister who used to comfort me during nightmares. "Piper, I owe you an apology," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I've been struggling with Dad's decision, and I've let that affect how I've been treating you. It wasn't fair." Relief flooded through me. This was the Victoria I remembered, the one who admitted when she was wrong and worked to make things right. "I understand, Vic. This has been hard on all of us. I never wanted things to be weird between us." She nodded, seemingly genuine in her remorse. "Dad saw something in you that I was too jealous to recognize. You have a gift for bringing out the best in people. The company needs that kind of leadership." We talked for over an hour about Dad's vision, the challenges ahead, and how we could work together despite the changed dynamics. By the time she left, I felt like we'd turned a corner. My sister was back, and we could face the future together. That conversation happened on a Thursday. The following Monday, Victoria's attitude had completely shifted again, but this time she was better at hiding her hostility. She'd smile during meetings while undermining my decisions. She'd agree with my plans publicly, then quietly express concerns to Logan and other key employees. I started noticing people looking at me differently, conversations stopping when I approached, a general atmosphere of uncertainty that hadn't existed before. It was subtle psychological warfare designed to make me question my own judgment and authority. 3 weeks after our heart-to-heart conversation, Victoria surprised me with an invitation that seemed too good to be true. And as any decent person knows, when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. But grief makes you desperate for connection, especially with the people you love most. "I've been thinking," Victoria said, appearing in my office doorway with a smile that almost reached her eyes. "Logan and I want to take you out on the boat this weekend. You know, celebrate your new role properly. We never really got to process everything that's happened." The offer caught me off guard. Logan had bought a small fishing boat the previous summer, and the three of us had spent many peaceful afternoons out on the water. Those trips represented some of our best family moments, away from work stress and daily pressures. Just siblings enjoying each other's company. "That sounds wonderful," I said, genuinely touched by what felt like an olive branch. "I'd love that. Things have been so tense lately, and I miss how we used to be." Victoria's expression softened, and for a moment I saw genuine emotion there. "Me too. I know I haven't handled Dad's decision well. The grief, the changes, everything has been overwhelming. But you're my sister, and that's more important than business." We spent the next few minutes planning the details. Saturday morning departure, a full day on the water, maybe some fishing if the weather cooperated. Logan would handle the boat preparations while Victoria packed lunch. It felt like old times, like family. Friday evening, I was excited enough to call my best friend Sarah about the plans. "Finally," she said, "I was getting worried about how distant Victoria had become. This sounds like exactly what you all need." "I know," I agreed, pulling clothes from my closet for the next day. "Sometimes it takes something dramatic like Dad's death to remind you what really matters. I'm actually optimistic about working together now." Sarah paused before responding. "Just be careful, Piper. I know she's your sister, but the way she's been acting at the company lately has been concerning. Several employees have mentioned feeling caught between you two." I understood Sarah's caution, but this felt different. Victoria had seemed genuinely remorseful, genuinely interested in rebuilding our relationship. Sometimes you have to take people at face value and hope for the best. Besides, what was the alternative? Letting resentment destroy our family entirely? Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear. Perfect weather for a day on the water. I packed a small overnight bag since we discussed the possibility of staying late to watch the sunset from the boat. Logan had suggested bringing sleeping bags in case we wanted to anchor somewhere scenic for the evening. I arrived at the marina feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The stress of managing the company, dealing with family tension, and processing Dad's death had been overwhelming. This trip represented a chance to reset everything, to remember why family matters more than business. Victoria and Logan were already at the boat, loading supplies and checking equipment. They both seemed genuinely happy to see me, welcoming me aboard with hugs and easy conversation. Logan had prepared his usual elaborate fishing setup, complete with a tackle box that could stock a sporting goods store. "Ready for the day of family bonding we've all needed?" Victoria asked, her arm around my shoulders as Logan started the engine. "Absolutely," I replied, breathing in the salt air and feeling optimistic about our future together. This is exactly what Dad would have wanted for us. As we pulled away from the dock, I was thinking about how Dad used to say that family was the only thing that truly lasted. Everything else, money, success, possessions, could disappear overnight. But family endured through everything if you nurtured it properly. I was about to discover just how wrong he'd been about that. The first few hours on the water were exactly what I'd hoped for. We found a perfect spot about 2 miles offshore where Logan claimed the fishing was always excellent. Victoria had packed an incredible lunch, complete with the homemade pasta salad that had been Dad's favorite at family gatherings. We talked about everything except work. Victoria shared stories about her college friends. Logan discussed his plans to upgrade the boat's navigation system, and I found myself relaxing completely for the first time in months. The sun was warm, the water was calm, and my family felt like family again. "Remember when Dad first taught us to fish?" Victoria asked, casting her line with the practiced motion he'd drilled into us as children. I was so squeamish about touching the worms that I made him bait my hook every single time. "Until that day you caught the biggest fish of the trip," I added, laughing at the memory. "Then suddenly you were the expert fisherman who deserved all the credit." We all laughed, and the sound carried across the water like a promise that things could be normal again. These were the moments I'd been missing, the connection that made family worth fighting for. I felt guilty for doubting Victoria's intentions, for listening to Sarah's warnings instead of trusting my sister. Around noon, Logan suggested moving to a more secluded area he'd discovered recently. "It's this little cove that's protected from the wind," he explained, already starting the engine. "Perfect for anchoring if we decide to stay late." The boat ride to the new location took about 30 minutes, carrying us further from shore and other boats. The isolation was peaceful rather than concerning. After all, this was exactly what we'd come for, uninterrupted family time away from the pressures of daily life. The cove was beautiful, surrounded by rocky cliffs that created a natural amphitheater. Logan anchored us in the center where the water was deepest, explaining that this position would give us the best fishing opportunities. Victoria had become quieter during the trip, but I assumed she was simply enjoying the tranquility. "This is perfect," I said, looking around at the pristine scenery. "I can see why you wanted to bring us here. It feels like we're the only people in the world." Logan and Victoria exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret. "That's exactly why I chose this spot," Logan replied, his voice carrying an odd undertone. "Privacy is so important for important conversations." "Important conversations?" I asked, settling into my favorite spot near the boat's bow. "I thought we were here to relax and fish." Victoria stood up from where she'd been organizing tackle, her demeanor shifting in a way that made me suddenly alert. The warmth that had characterized the morning was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating that made my stomach tighten with the first stirrings of genuine concern. "Actually, Piper, we need to discuss something with you," she said, her voice taking on the professional tone she used during difficult business meetings. "About the company, about Dad's will, about the future we're all facing." I looked between my sister and brother-in-law, noting how they'd positioned themselves near the boat's controls while I remained isolated at the front. The beautiful cove suddenly felt less like paradise and more like a trap. "What kind of conversation?" I asked, my instincts finally awakening to the reality that this trip might not be the family bonding experience I'd anticipated. Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut. "The kind where we solve our family's problems permanently." The change in atmosphere was so sudden it felt like a physical blow. One moment we were sharing family memories, and the next I was staring at two people who looked like my family but felt like strangers. Victoria's expression had hardened into something I'd never seen before, while Logan's easy smile had been replaced by cold calculation. "I don't understand," I said. Though a growing part of me absolutely understood, and was screaming warnings I'd ignored for too long. "What problems are you talking about?" Victoria moved closer, her voice taking on the patient tone you'd use with a child. "Come on, Piper. You had to know this couldn't continue. You running Dad's company when you're clearly not equipped for it. The employees pretending to respect your leadership when they're actually waiting for real authority to return." "That's not true," I said, standing up and immediately realizing my mistake. The boat rocked slightly, reminding me exactly how isolated we were. "The company is doing well. The team respects my decisions." Logan laughed. Actually laughed, as he moved to block my path toward the boat's radio. "They tolerate your decisions because they don't want to lose their jobs. But they come to Victoria with their real concerns, their actual problems. You've been playing dress-up as CEO while the real work happens around you." The cruelty in his words was designed to wound, and it succeeded. Every insecurity I'd harbored about my qualifications, every moment I'd questioned my authority, Every sleepless night wondering if I was failing Dad's legacy. All of it came rushing back with devastating force. Dad left the company to me, I said, my voice sounding weaker than I intended. He believed I could lead it. Victoria's expression shifted to something almost pitying. Dad was dying, Piper. He was medicated, confused, probably felt guilty about all the years he favored me in business decisions. That will was written by a man who wasn't thinking clearly. You know what the real problem is? Logan added, stepping closer. You actually believe you deserve what you inherited. You think Dad's momentary lapse in judgment means you're somehow special, somehow chosen. I backed toward the boat's edge, my mind racing through options that didn't exist. We were miles from shore, alone in a cove that no one else knew about. Dependent on people who clearly had intentions I was only beginning to understand. What do you want? I asked, the question coming out as barely more than a whisper. Victoria tilted her head thoughtfully. We want what Dad should have left us. The company, the control, the respect we've earned through years of actual competence. We want you to step aside gracefully and let the people who belong in charge take their rightful place. And if I refuse? Logan's smile was genuinely terrifying. That's what makes this location so perfect, Piper. Accidents happen on the water all the time. Boats develop mechanical problems. People fall overboard. Sometimes bodies are never recovered. The words hit me like ice water, finally making the situation crystal clear. This wasn't a family meeting or an intervention about my leadership style. This was something far worse, something I couldn't have imagined my own family capable of planning. You're talking about murder, I said, the word feeling foreign and impossible even as I spoke it. We're talking about solving a problem, Victoria corrected calmly. Sometimes the solution requires difficult choices. I looked at my sister, this person I'd loved and trusted my entire life, and saw a stranger wearing her face. The grief, the resentment, the jealousy had transformed her into someone capable of unspeakable things. And Logan, who I'd welcomed as family, stood beside her ready to act on whatever plan they'd made. The beauty of this approach, Victoria continued conversationally, is that it solves everything. The company returns to proper leadership. The family business continues under experienced management, and everyone remembers you fondly as the sister who died tragically young. That's when I realized they weren't just planning to kill me. They were planning to profit from my death. You can't be serious, I said, though their expressions made it clear they were completely serious. This is insane. We're family. Victoria's laugh was cold enough to freeze blood. Family? When was the last time you acted like family, Piper? You took everything Dad left, never once offering to share power or make decisions together. You've been playing the grieving daughter while systematically excluding us from our own heritage. I never excluded anyone, I protested, my voice rising with desperation and disbelief. I kept both of you in your positions, tried to work together, tried to honor what Dad built. Logan moved toward the boat's small cabin, returning with a toolbox I hadn't noticed before. You honored what Dad built by dismantling everything Victoria and I contributed. Every suggestion we made was politely dismissed. Every concern we raised was patronizingly addressed. That's not true. But even as I said it, I wondered if there was truth in their accusations. Had I unconsciously asserted my authority at their expense? Had I been so focused on proving myself worthy of Dad's trust that I'd forgotten to value their experience? Victoria seemed to read my thoughts. There it is, that little flicker of doubt. You know we're right, don't you? Deep down, you've always known you weren't qualified for this responsibility. Logan began removing tools from the box, including a small drill that made my stomach turn over. The thing is, Piper, even if you offered to share power now, it's too late. The damage is done. The employees have seen you undermine our authority. Our clients have watched you stumble through decisions we could have made easily. But mostly, Victoria added, moving to help Logan with whatever they were preparing, we've realized that we don't actually need you anymore. The company will be stronger, more profitable, and more respected under our leadership. I watched in horror as Logan began drilling holes in the boat's hull below the waterline. Not large holes, but enough to ensure the boat would take on water slowly but inevitably. They weren't planning a dramatic accident. They were planning something that would look like mechanical failure. This is insane, I repeated, backing toward the cabin where I hoped to find something to defend myself with or some way to contact help. People will know. Sarah knows I'm here with you. The marina has records. Sarah knows you went on a family bonding trip that tragically ended in accident, Victoria said calmly. The marina knows we took a boat out that developed mechanical problems. These things happen, especially with older vessels. Logan finished his work and tested the flow of water beginning to seep into the boat's lower compartment. Perfect rate, he announced with professional satisfaction. We'll have plenty of time to radio for help after the tragic accident that claimed poor Piper's life. I reached the cabin door and found it locked from the outside. When had they done that? How long had they been planning this? The level of premeditation was more terrifying than the immediate threat. The best part, Victoria continued, watching me struggle with the cabin door, is that Logan and I will inherit everything automatically. As your business partners and closest family, we'll naturally take over the company during the grief period. By the time the legal details are settled, we'll have proven ourselves indispensable. Water was beginning to pool around my feet as the boat slowly took on water. Not fast enough to panic yet, but steady enough to confirm that Logan knew exactly what he was doing. They'd thought of everything. Please, I said, hating the desperation in my voice but unable to hide it. We can work this out. We can find a solution that doesn't involve anyone getting hurt. Logan looked almost sympathetic. The solution was offering you a partnership, Piper, asking you to share what rightfully belonged to all of us. You chose to keep everything for yourself. Victoria moved to the boat's radio, probably preparing to disable it so I couldn't call for help once they left me to drown. You know what Dad used to say about business? Sometimes you have to make hard decisions for the greater good. As she reached for the radio, I realized this was my last chance to fight back. Whatever they had planned next would probably involve restraining me or ensuring I couldn't escape from the sinking boat. I lunged toward Victoria, hoping to reach the radio before she could destroy it. But Logan caught my arm and twisted it behind my back with surprising strength. None of that, he said almost gently. We want this to look natural. A struggle would complicate the story. That's when Victoria pulled out a small syringe, and I understood that they'd planned for every contingency, including my resistance. Don't worry, she said softly as Logan held me still. You'll just go to sleep, and when you wake up, everything will be over. The last thing I saw before the sedative took effect was my sister's face, wearing an expression of regret that might have been genuine. The last thing I heard was Victoria whispering, "See you in the next life, Piper." I woke up underwater, which is definitely not how I'd planned to spend my Saturday. The sedative had worn off just as the cabin filled with enough water to reach my chest. Victoria and Logan were long gone, of course, leaving me to drown in what they'd probably describe as a tragic boating accident to the authorities. The boat was sinking faster now, tilting at an angle that made everything slide toward the rapidly flooding corner. I had maybe 10 minutes of air left in the small pocket near the cabin ceiling. Most people in this situation would panic. And honestly, part of me wanted to. But panic wasn't going to get me out of this mess. What do you think will happen next? Will Piper find a way to survive, or is this the end of her story? Drop your predictions in the comments below. I felt around in the murky water for anything useful. My hand closed around a wrench that Logan had apparently dropped during his hull drilling project. Heavy, solid metal with enough weight behind it to do some damage. I looked up at the small cabin window, calculating angles and hoping physics would work in my favor for once. The window was designed to withstand normal water pressure, not desperate women with wrenches and nothing left to lose. I positioned myself as best I could in the tilting, flooding space and swung with every ounce of strength I had. The first hit created a spider web of cracks. The second hit opened a gap large enough for water to rush in faster, which seemed counterproductive until I realized it also equalized the pressure. The third hit shattered the window completely. I squeezed through the opening just as the boat's cabin went completely under, my lungs burning as I fought my way toward what I hoped was the surface. The cove that had seemed so peaceful hours earlier now felt like a watery grave designed specifically for me. When I finally broke the surface, gasping and coughing up salt water, I had maybe 30 seconds to orient myself before hypothermia and exhaustion would make swimming impossible. The rocky cliffs of the cove offered no easy way out, and the distance to open water where other boats might see me was probably too far to swim. That's when I heard the engine. A fishing boat was cutting across the mouth of the cove, its occupants probably unaware that someone was drowning nearby. I started screaming and waving my arms, using the last of my energy to make myself visible. The engine noise continued without changing direction. Then it stopped. A voice called across the water. "Hello? Is someone out there?" I screamed back with everything I had left. "Help me! Please! I'm drowning!" The next few minutes blurred together in a chaos of strong hands pulling me out of the water, emergency blankets, and urgent radio calls to the Coast Guard. The fishing boat belonged to a marine research team studying fish populations in the area. Pure luck had brought them to this exact spot at this exact time. What happened? asked Dr. Sarah Chen, the team leader, as she checked my vital signs. Where's your boat? It sank, I managed through chattering teeth. My sister and brother-in-law, they left me. The word sounded insane even to me. Who would believe that family members had deliberately tried to commit murder? Dr. Chen's expression suggested she was thinking the same thing, but she was too professional to argue with someone in medical distress. We need to get you to a hospital immediately, she said, wrapping another blanket around my shivering body. You're hypothermic, possibly in shock, and you've been in the water too long. As their boat raced toward shore, I closed my eyes and tried to process what had just happened. Victoria and Logan had planned my murder with the same methodical attention to detail they brought to business projects. They'd drugged me, sabotaged the boat, and left me to die, all while maintaining plausible deniability. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed their plan would work. The hospital at Camden Bay was small but efficient, which was fortunate since I arrived unconscious and without any identification. Everything I owned had gone down with the boat, leaving me as an unidentified drowning victim with no obvious family to contact. I woke up 3 days later to the sound of medical equipment beeping steadily beside my bed. My throat felt raw, my head pounded, and every muscle in my body ached like I'd been hit by a truck. But I was alive, which put me several steps ahead of where Victoria and Logan thought I'd be. "Good morning," said a kind-faced nurse named Janet as she checked my IV. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been underwater for 3 days," I croaked, then realized that was probably more accurate than I'd intended. Janet smiled sympathetically. "The doctors say you're very lucky. Another few minutes in that water and hypothermia would have been irreversible. Do you remember what happened?" Everything came flooding back at once. The boat trip, the conversation, Victoria's cold smile as she injected me with sedative, the desperate escape through the cabin window, the rescue that had saved my life. And somewhere, my family was probably planning my funeral. "I need to call the police," I said, struggling to sit up despite Janet's gentle protests. "My sister and brother-in-law tried to kill me." The words sounded crazy out loud, but Janet's expression remained professionally neutral. "The police have been waiting to speak with you. Should I let them know you're awake?" 2 officers arrived within the hour. Detective Mike Torres and Officer Lisa Park. They were polite but clearly skeptical as I told my story. Who wouldn't be? It sounded like something from a bad movie rather than real life. "So you're saying your sister deliberately sabotaged the boat and left you to drown?" Detective Torres asked, taking careful notes. "That's exactly what I'm saying. They planned the whole thing. The family bonding trip, the isolated location, everything. They want to take over our father's company." Officer Park exchanged a glance with her partner. "Miss... I'm sorry, we still don't have your last name." "Harrison. Piper Harrison. I own Harrison Construction Company." I paused, remembering that Victoria and Logan probably thought they owned it now. "Well, I did own it before they tried to murder me." Detective Torres looked up from his notepad with renewed interest. "Harrison Construction? The one in the news?" "What news?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew. Officer Park pulled out her phone and scrolled through local headlines. "Missing heiress feared dead after boating accident. Family holds memorial service for beloved construction company owner." My heart stopped. Memorial service? "According to this," Detective Torres said, reading over his partner's shoulder, "your sister Victoria Harrison and her husband Logan reported you missing 3 days ago. They said the boat developed mechanical problems, and you fell overboard during the emergency. Your body was never recovered." I stared at them in disbelief. "They've already held my funeral?" Officer Park checked her watch. "Actually, according to this article, the memorial service is happening right now. Started about an hour ago at St. Mary's Church downtown." The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. While I was lying in a hospital bed very much alive, my murderous family was accepting condolences for my tragic death. Victoria was probably giving a touching eulogy about how much she'd miss her beloved sister. "I want to go to my funeral," I said suddenly. Both officers looked at me like I'd suffered brain damage along with hypothermia. "Ma'am, that might not be the best idea," Detective Torres said diplomatically. "On the contrary," I replied, feeling strength return to my voice for the first time in days. "I think it's the perfect idea. Nothing says murder plot gone wrong like the victim showing up to her own memorial service." Detective Torres closed his notepad. "If you're serious about pressing charges, we'll need to investigate your claims thoroughly. But if what you're telling us is true, appearing at your funeral would certainly provide dramatic evidence." Officer Park was already reaching for her radio. "I'll call for backup. If we're arresting people at a church service, we're going to need additional units." As they made arrangements, I found myself smiling for the first time since this nightmare began. Victoria and Logan thought they'd eliminated their problem permanently. They were about to discover that some problems have a way of coming back from the dead. The ride to St. Mary's Church gave me time to process what was about to happen. I was literally coming back from the dead to confront the people who tried to kill me. It felt surreal, like something that couldn't possibly be real life. Detective Torres rode with me in the ambulance they'd insisted on using for transportation, given my recent medical trauma. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Miss Harrison? We could wait, gather more evidence, build a stronger case." "They're holding my funeral right now," I said, adjusting the hospital gown I was still wearing under the jacket someone had found for me. "If that's not evidence of attempted murder, I don't know what is." Officer Park's voice crackled over the radio. "We're positioned outside the church. Service appears to be in progress. Multiple vehicles in the parking lot. Probably 50 to 60 people inside. 50 to 60 people mourning my death while I sat in an ambulance, very much alive. The absurdity of it all was almost overwhelming. These were colleagues, friends, family members who genuinely believed I was dead. Their grief was real, even if the circumstances that caused it were fabricated. "How do you want to handle this?" Detective Torres asked as we pulled into the church parking lot. I looked through the ambulance window at St. Mary's, where I'd attended services as a child with my family. Victoria and Logan were inside right now, probably playing the role of grieving survivors, accepting sympathy and support from people who had no idea they were comforting murderers. "I want to walk in during the service," I said. "I want them to see me, to realize their plan failed, before you arrest them." Detective Torres looked uncomfortable with the dramatic approach, but Officer Park's voice came over the radio again. "Actually, that might be the most effective strategy. If they react with shock and guilt rather than surprise and relief, it'll support her story significantly." We waited outside for another 10 minutes while the police positioned themselves at all exits. The plan was simple. I would enter through the main doors during what appeared to be the eulogy portion of the service. The officers would follow immediately behind me, ready to make arrests based on Victoria and Logan's reactions. "This is either going to be the most satisfying moment of your life," Detective Torres said as we prepared to enter, "or the most traumatic. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this?" I thought about the last 3 days, waking up underwater, fighting for my life, learning that my own sister had planned my murder. Then I thought about the next 3 days, and all the days after that, knowing that Victoria and Logan believed they'd gotten away with it. "I've never been more certain of anything," I said. We walked up the church steps, and I could hear voices through the heavy wooden doors. Someone was speaking, probably giving a eulogy, my eulogy, for the death that wasn't supposed to have witnesses. I pushed open the doors and stepped into the sanctuary. The scene that greeted me was exactly what you'd expect at a funeral, except the guest of honor was standing in the doorway very much alive. Flowers lined the altar, a large photograph of me sat on an easel, and my sister Victoria stood at the podium, tissues in hand, delivering what appeared to be a heartfelt tribute to my memory. "Piper was the heart of our family," she was saying, her voice heavy with emotion that might have been genuine. "She brought such joy and life to everything she touched. Her loss leaves a hole in our hearts that can never be filled." The performance was so convincing that for a moment I almost felt guilty for interrupting it. Then Logan spotted me from the front pew, and the expression on his face was everything the police needed to see. The silence that followed my entrance was deafening. 50 people turned in their seats to stare at the supposedly dead woman standing in the church doorway, while Victoria froze at the podium like a statue caught mid-lie. "I hope I'm not late," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary. I thought it would be rude to miss my own funeral. The reactions were immediate and telling. Employees and friends looked confused but relieved, their faces showing the natural response to discovering someone they cared about was actually alive. Family members appeared shocked but happy. Victoria and Logan, however, looked like they'd seen an actual ghost. Logan's face had gone completely white, and his hands were trembling as he gripped the edge of the pew. Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, the tissues falling from her hands to scatter on the floor around the podium. "Piper," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the murmur of confusion spreading through the congregation. "Surprised to see me, sis?" I asked, walking slowly down the center aisle as Detective Torres and Officer Park followed behind me. "I have to say, this is quite a beautiful service, though I think the timing might be a bit premature." Members of the congregation began standing, some moving toward me with expressions of joy and relief. These were people who genuinely cared about me, who had come to mourn what they thought was a tragic loss. Their happiness at seeing me alive felt like a warm embrace after days of cold betrayal. But how? Victoria started to say, then seemed to realize that completing that sentence would be problematic. How was I alive? Because she'd tried to kill me and failed. Logan found his voice first, though it came out as a croak. We thought you drowned. The boat sank. We couldn't find you. We had to assume. You had to assume I was dead? I asked conversationally, continuing my walk toward the front of the church. That's interesting, Logan, considering you're the one who drilled holes in the boat's hull. Gasps echoed through the sanctuary as the implications of my words sank in. Mr. Peterson from the accounting department looked confused. Mrs. Williams from the church auxiliary looked horrified. And Father Michael, who was officiating the service, looked like he needed to sit down. That's impossible, Victoria said, finally finding her voice. Why would Logan damage the boat? Why would we want to hurt you? Detective Torres stepped forward, his badge visible. Miss Victoria Harrison and Mr. Logan Harrison, you're under arrest for attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. The rest of his words were drowned out by the chaos that erupted in the church. People were shouting questions, moving toward exits, pulling out phones to record the scene. In the middle of it all, Victoria and Logan stood frozen as the reality of their situation became clear. They'd planned the perfect crime, but their victim had survived to tell the story. Officer Park moved to handcuff Victoria, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the past few minutes. This is insane, she kept repeating. This is all insane. Piper, tell them this is crazy. We would never hurt you. You're right about one thing, I said as they led my sister and brother-in-law toward the church doors. This is crazy. It's crazy that my own family would try to murder me for a business. It's crazy that you planned my funeral while I was fighting for my life. It's crazy that you almost got away with it. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. You don't understand, she screamed as the handcuffs clicked into place. That company should have been mine. Dad was sick when he wrote that will. You manipulated him. There it was. The real Victoria. The one who'd been hiding behind fake apologies and family bonding trips. The one who believed she deserved everything, and I deserved nothing, not even the right to live. The only thing I manipulated, I said quietly, was a wrench to break out of the cabin where you left me to die. As they led Victoria and Logan away, I looked around at the faces of people who had come to mourn my death and were now witnessing my resurrection. Tomorrow would bring questions, investigations, and probably media attention I didn't want. But today, I was alive when I should have been dead, and the people who'd tried to kill me were in handcuffs. It was a pretty good day. The weeks that followed my resurrection were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and therapy sessions I definitely needed. The story of the murdered heiress who survived her own funeral became national news, which brought both support and unwanted scrutiny to my life. But the most interesting development happened in jail, where Victoria and Logan discovered that attempted murder charges have a way of destroying even the strongest partnerships. I wasn't present for their initial conversations with lawyers, but Detective Torres kept me informed about how quickly their united front crumbled. Apparently, when facing life in prison, even true love has its limits. Logan's attorney made the first move, reaching out to the prosecutor's office with an offer of cooperation. According to the police reports I was allowed to see, Logan claimed that the entire murder plot had been Victoria's idea, that he'd been reluctant to participate, and that he'd only gone along with it because he feared for his own safety. Classic, I told Detective Torres when he briefed me on Logan's strategy. Throw the woman under the bus and play the victim. I'm sure Victoria saw that coming from miles away. Actually, Detective Torres said with something that might have been amusement, that's where it gets interesting. Victoria's attorney reached out with a similar offer 2 hours after Logan's lawyer called. Victoria's version of events painted Logan as the mastermind, a manipulative man who had gradually turned her against me through months of psychological pressure. According to her statement, she'd never wanted to hurt me, but had been terrified of what Logan might do if she refused to participate. Both stories were carefully crafted to minimize their individual responsibility while maximizing their partner's guilt. Both stories were also complete fabrications designed to save their own skin. So, they're both claiming to be victims of each other? I asked. Essentially, yes. And since they can't both be telling the truth, the prosecutor is planning to take both cases to trial and let a jury decide who's lying. The trial preparation process revealed details about Victoria and Logan's relationship that I'd never known. Apparently, their marriage had been struggling financially for months before Dad's death. Logan's consulting business was failing, and Victoria's salary alone wasn't enough to maintain their expensive lifestyle. When Dad's will left the company to me instead of Victoria, they'd faced bankruptcy within 6 months. The murder plot wasn't just about jealousy and resentment, it was about survival. They literally couldn't afford for me to live. The financial motive makes everything clearer, explained District Attorney Sarah Chen during one of our meetings. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was calculated murder for profit. That makes it harder for either defendant to claim they were reluctant participants. The most damaging evidence came from Logan's laptop, which contained detailed research about boat accidents, insurance policies, and inheritance laws. He'd apparently spent weeks planning every aspect of my death, from the location to the cover story to the timeline for taking over the company. Victoria's phone revealed a different kind of evidence. Months of text messages to friends and family undermining my competence and authority. She'd been laying the groundwork for my removal from the company long before they'd decided on murder as their solution. She was building a narrative, D.A. Chen explained. If the murder plot had worked, she would have stepped in as the grieving sister who reluctantly took over the business to honor your memory. The groundwork was already in place. The trial itself was a media circus, with reporters dissecting every detail of our family dynamics and business relationships. I testified about the boat trip, the conversation in the cove, and waking up underwater fighting for my life. The jury listened with expressions ranging from horror to fascination. Victoria took the stand in her own defense, maintaining that Logan had forced her participation through threats and manipulation. She cried during her testimony, claiming that she'd loved me too much to hurt me willingly. Logan's testimony painted Victoria as the driving force behind the plot, a woman consumed by jealousy and greed who had gradually convinced him that murder was their only option. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning with their verdicts. The verdict was everything I'd hoped for and everything Victoria and Logan had feared. The jury found both of them guilty of attempted murder in the first degree, but their sentences reflected the very different deals they'd tried to make with the prosecution. Logan, whose cooperation had been deemed more valuable due to his detailed planning documents, received 15 years with the possibility of parole in 8. Victoria, who the jury apparently viewed as the primary instigator, received life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The looks on their faces when the sentences were read told the complete story of their relationship. Logan's relief at his relatively lighter sentence was obvious, while Victoria's expression showed the devastation of someone who'd been utterly betrayed by the person she'd trusted most. Their marriage had been legally dissolved before the trial even began, with both parties citing irreconcilable differences. Apparently, attempted murder together was the kind of shared experience that destroyed rather than strengthened their bond. "Justice served," Detective Torres said as we left the courthouse together. "How does it feel to finally have closure?" "Honestly," I said, looking back at the building where my sister would spend the next quarter-century paying for her choices, "it feels like the beginning rather than the ending." He was right about closure, though. For months, I'd been living with the knowledge that the people who'd tried to kill me were free, possibly planning another attempt. Now they were behind bars, and I could focus on rebuilding the life they'd tried to take from me. Harrison Construction Company had suffered during the months of legal proceedings and media attention, but the employees had rallied around me with loyalty I found deeply moving. They'd kept projects on schedule, maintained client relationships, and protected the company's reputation through one of the most difficult periods in its history. "Your father would be proud," said Frank Morrison, our longest-tenured foreman during the company meeting where I officially resumed my full duties. "Not just of how you survived, but of how you've handled everything since." The business had actually grown during my absence, as our story attracted new clients who wanted to work with a company led by someone with proven resilience. We landed 3 major contracts in the months following the trial, including a hospital complex that would be our largest project to date. More importantly, the company culture had evolved into something stronger than what Dad had built. The attempted murder had revealed which employees were truly committed to our values, and which were simply going through the motions. Those who remained formed a core team united by shared purpose and mutual respect. 6 months after the trial, we threw the largest celebration in company history to commemorate our best quarterly earnings ever. The party was held at the marina where I'd almost died, a location I'd chosen deliberately to demonstrate that I wouldn't be defined by trauma. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, raising a glass of champagne as our team gathered around me. "Dad used to say that the true test of any organization wasn't how it performed during good times, but how it responded to crisis." The crowd grew quiet, dozens of faces looking up at me with respect and affection that felt nothing like the fear-based compliance Victoria had always commanded. "This company didn't just survive an attempt to destroy it," I continued. "It became stronger, more unified, and more successful than ever before. That's because it was built on a foundation that couldn't be shaken by greed or betrayal. Frank Morrison, who'd worked for Dad since the beginning, stepped forward with a grin. Your father knew what he was doing when he left you in charge. You've got the heart for this work, and the backbone to protect what matters. As applause filled the air around me, I thought about Victoria sitting in her prison cell, probably still believing that she deserved what I'd inherited. She'd never understand that leadership wasn't about deserving power. It was about serving something larger than yourself. The sunset painted the water in shades of gold and crimson, the same water where I'd nearly died fighting for my life. Now it looked peaceful again, beautiful rather than threatening. A reminder that some endings are actually beginnings in disguise. Harrison Construction Company would continue to grow, continue to build, continue to honor the values that Dad had instilled and I'd fought to preserve. And every success we achieved would be a testament to the simple truth that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight comes from the people who should love you most. The last toast of the evening was Frank's idea, but the words were mine. To family that chooses to build rather than destroy, and to the future we're creating together. As glasses clinked around me and laughter carried across the water, I realized that I'd finally found what Dad had always wanted for me, a family worth keeping and a legacy worth protecting.